Before I tell you what happened, and believe me, it's a story worth hearing, let me ask you, have you ever been made to feel small by the very people you poured your heart into? My grandkids, bless their youthful ignorance, they laughed. Laughed because I, at my age, sometimes repeat myself. Well, I decided to repeat something else, something very important, and this time, their names weren't on the list. This is how a moment of cruel laughter cost them more than they could ever imagine, and how I found a piece I thought was lost to me. I'm Alara, by the way, and this is my story. For 78 years, I'd considered myself a woman of patience, a woman who understood the cycles of life, the ebbs and flows of family. My late husband, Arthur, always said I had the resilience of an old oak, bending in the wind but never breaking. We'd built a good life, a life centered around our son, Mark, and later his own family. Arthur was gone too soon, a sudden heart attack stealing him away just as we were planning our retirement travels. I mourned him deeply, still do, but I knew he'd want me to carry on, to find joy in what remained. And for a long time, that joy was Mark, his wife Karen, and their two children, Liam and Chloe. Liam, with his quick wit that I once found endearing, and Chloe, who had a knack for artistic things, a trait I secretly hoped she'd inherited from my side of the family. I poured so much of myself into them, into all of them. When Mark and Karen were struggling to get their business off the ground, my savings became their lifeline, a gift given with an open heart and no expectation of repayment. I babysat Liam and Chloe from the time they were infants, my house filled with the happy chaos of sticky fingers, bedtime stories, and scraped knees patched up with a kiss and a colorful bandage. I remember Liam, barely old enough to walk, toddling towards me, his arms outstretched, his little face beaming. "Nana," he'd chirp, and my heart would melt. Chloe would spend hours in my small garden, her brow furrowed in concentration as she helped me tend the roses Arthur had planted. Those were precious days, days I tucked away like treasures. I thought those bonds were unbreakable, forged in love and shared history. My home, the one Arthur and I bought half a century ago, was always open. Sunday dinners were a tradition, even after the kids grew into teenagers with their own busy lives. I'd spend all day cooking, Arthur's favorite roast, Chloe's preferred apple crumble. It was my way of keeping us connected, of weaving the tapestry of family tighter. I didn't ask for much in return, just their presence, their time, perhaps a little appreciation. But as the years advanced, a subtle shift occurred, so subtle at first I barely registered it, dismissing it as the natural progression of things. Teenagers become absorbed in their own worlds, I told myself. Mark and Karen were busy, stressed. It was understandable. Yet a little voice, a whisper of unease, began to prick at me. The visits became shorter, the conversations more perfunctory. The laughter, when it came, sometimes felt different. Not shared, but directed. I was getting older, yes. My steps were a little slower, my hands sometimes trembled when I poured tea. And yes, occasionally, a story I'd told before would surface again, or I'd ask a question twice. It happens. I never thought it was a failing, just a quirk of accumulating years. Little did I know, it was becoming a point of private amusement for those I held most dear. The day it all crystallized, the day the veil of my loving denial was ripped away, was a Sunday like any other, or so it began. It was Liam's 19th birthday, and I'd made his favorite chocolate cake, the rich, dark kind he'd adored since he was a boy. The family was gathered around my dining table, the one Arthur and I had picked out so carefully all those years ago. The conversation flowed, mostly around Liam's college plans and Chloe's upcoming art show. I listened, interjecting now and then, feeling the familiar warmth of having my family around me. I started to recount a memory from one of our early holidays, a funny incident involving a rogue seagull and Arthur's hat. "And your grandfather, he was so startled," I began, a smile playing on my lips. He jumped back, and the hat. Midway through, I noticed Karen stifle a yawn, her eyes flicking towards Mark with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, but that made my stomach clench. I pressed on, perhaps a little flustered. A few minutes later, The conversation having moved on, I inadvertently started the same anecdote. Oh, you know, it reminds me of that time with the seagull when your grandfather. I didn't even get to the part about the hat. Liam snorted first, a sharp, sudden sound. Then Chloe giggled, a high-pitched, almost mocking sound that cut right through me. They exchanged a look, that quick, knowing glance of shared private humor that excludes its subject. Nana, Liam said, a smirk playing on his lips. You told us that one already. Like, 5 minutes ago, his tone wasn't gentle, wasn't kind. It was laced with amusement, condescension. Chloe chimed in, Yeah, Nana, your replay button is stuck. And then they both laughed. Not a warm, familial chuckle, but a derisive, dismissive laugh. The kind that makes you feel foolish, insignificant. I looked at Mark, my son. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a faint flush rising on his neck, but he said nothing. Karen just smiled thinly, a tight, polite mask that didn't reach her eyes. The room fell silent, except for the echo of their laughter in my ears. The chocolate cake sat on the sideboard, its rich aroma suddenly cloying. The story, Arthur's hat, the seagull, it all died on my lips. I felt a cold wave wash over me, starting at my scalp and prickling its way down to my toes. My hands, resting in my lap, began to tremble, not from age this time, but from a profound, shattering hurt. I managed a weak smile. Oh, I see. My apologies, the rest of the meal passed in a blur of strained small talk, mostly from Karen, trying to paper over the chasm that had just opened up. I don't remember what was said. I just remember the feeling, a deep, aching coldness where warmth used to reside. They left soon after, perfunctory hugs and love you, Nana, that sounded hollow, utterly meaningless after what had transpired. As I closed the door behind them, the sound of their car pulling away felt like a final severing. The laughter, their bright, cruel laughter, bounced off the walls of my suddenly too empty house. It wasn't just that I repeated myself, it was that my vulnerability, a simple sign of my advancing years, had become a source of their entertainment. I was no longer Nana, the beloved matriarch. I was a punchline. The silence that descended after they left was deafening. I stood in the hallway for a long time, the scent of the uneaten chocolate cake heavy in the air. Liam's favorite. The effort, the love baked into it, now felt like a bitter mockery of my own naivety. I walked slowly into the living room, my legs feeling unsteady, and sank into Arthur's old armchair. The laughter, their laughter, kept replaying in my mind, each iteration sharper, more painful than the last. It wasn't just a fleeting moment of youthful insensitivity. It was a window into how they truly saw me. Old. Forgetful. A bit of a joke. The more I thought about it, the more other, smaller incidents began to surface, like pieces of a dark mosaic slotting into place. There was the time Chloe had rolled her eyes dramatically when I'd asked about her new friend for the second time in a week. Liam's increasingly impatient sighs when I'd take a moment to find my words. Karen's voice on the phone, that overly bright, slightly patronizing tone she used when she thought I wasn't quite grasping something. Yes, Ilara. We explained that already. Are you sure you're feeling all right? Even Mark, my own son, had started finishing my sentences, not in a helpful way, but as if to hurry me along, as if my thoughts were too slow, too cumbersome for the modern pace of life. Each memory was a fresh stab of pain. Had I been so blind? So desperate to maintain the illusion of a close, loving family that I'd ignored all the warning signs? I had poured my life, my resources, my unwavering affection into them. The house they grew up visiting, the holidays I funded, the emergency loans to Mark that were never repaid, the endless hours of childcare, had it all meant so little? Did they see me merely as a utility, a convenience, and now, as I aged, a slightly embarrassing old relative whose repetitive stories were something to be snickered at behind cupped hands? A wave of profound sadness washed over me, so potent it felt like grief. I was mourning the loss of something I thought was real, something I had cherished above all else, their respect, their genuine affection. The idea that my mind, the repository of my life's experiences, my love for them, my memories of Arthur, was being dismissed as faulty and humorous was an unbearable insult. I got up and walked over to the mantelpiece, picking up a framed photograph of Liam and Chloe when they were younger, perhaps 7 and 5. Their smiles were gap-toothed and innocent, their arms wrapped around my neck. Where had those children gone? When had they learned to wield laughter as a weapon against their own grandmother? That night, sleep was impossible. The house felt cold, despite the heating being on. Every creak of the old floorboards seemed to echo the hollowness inside me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the scene at the dinner table playing on a loop. Liam's smirk, Chloe's giggle, Mark's silence, Karen's tight smile. It wasn't just the repetition, it was the casual cruelty, the utter lack of empathy. And beneath the hurt, something else began to stir. A flicker of anger, perhaps. Or maybe it was resolve. A quiet, steely determination that I hadn't felt in years. They had underestimated me. They saw a fading old woman. They had forgotten, or perhaps never truly known, the strength that lay beneath the surface, the resilience Arthur had so admired. The dawn broke gray and cheerless, mirroring my mood, but within that gloom, a decision was taking root. It wasn't a fiery, impulsive reaction born of anger, though anger was certainly a component. It was a cold, hard certainty that settled in my bones. I had given them so much of myself, my time, my love, my resources. The laughter hadn't just been about a repeated story. It had been a dismissal of my entire being, a sign that they no longer valued me as a person, but perhaps only as a means to an end, an inheritance to be patiently waited for. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Were they already picturing themselves in this house, dividing my belongings, while I was still here, breathing, feeling? The cruelty of that possibility was a fresh wound. I made myself a cup of tea, my hands steadier now than they had been the night before. As I sat at my kitchen table, the one where I'd helped Liam and Chloe with their homework, where I'd bandaged their scraped knees, where I'd listened to their childhood dreams, I knew I couldn't let this stand. To do nothing would be to validate their perception of me as irrelevant, a powerless old woman whose feelings could be trampled without consequence. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself firmly. It was about dignity. It was about self-respect. It was about ensuring that my legacy, everything Arthur and I had worked for, would be treated with the respect it deserved, even if I was not. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had laughed because I repeated myself. Well, I would repeat an action I had taken before, an action concerning my will. But this time, the repetition would have a very different outcome. My current will, drafted years ago when the grandchildren were still children and my faith in family bonds was absolute, left the bulk of my estate, including the house, to be divided between Liam and Chloe, after ensuring Mark had what he needed. It was a traditional arrangement, one made with love and a sense of continuity. But continuity required respect, and respect had been glaringly absent. The laughter had been the last straw, as they say. It had illuminated the truth of my situation with a harsh, unflattering light. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue on their part, it was a symptom of a deeper disregard. I thought of Arthur. He had always been a man of principle. He believed in fairness, but he also believed in consequences. He would have been appalled by their behavior, by their casual cruelty. He would have wanted me to stand up for myself. The resolve hardened. I would change my will. The thought, once formed, brought a strange sense of calm. It was a concrete action, a way to reclaim some control in a situation where I had been made to feel utterly powerless. My mind, the one they implicitly mocked, was perfectly capable of this. I was not senile. I was not foolish. I was Alara, and I was about to remind them, in a way they would never forget, exactly who I was and what I stood for. The decision felt like a weight lifting, replaced by a clear, albeit somber, purpose. My love for them, the deep, grandmotherly affection, was still there, a painful ache in my chest, but it was now overshadowed by a profound disappointment and the need to protect my own dignity. The first step was to find a solicitor. I vaguely remembered a friend, Martha, mentioning a very competent and kind lawyer she had used a few years back for her own estate planning. Monica Holloway, that was the name. I found an old address book, its pages softened with age, and there it was, Monica Holloway, solicitor, with a phone number scribbled beside it. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the phone, not with fear this time, but with a sense of the gravity of what I was about to do. It took a moment to steady my breath before dialing. A calm, professional voice answered, "Holloway and Associates. How may I help you?" I asked for Miss Holloway, and after a brief hold, she came on the line. Her voice was warm, yet efficient. I explained, without going into excessive emotional detail, that I wished to review and make significant changes to my existing will. We scheduled an appointment for the following week. The days leading up to it were filled with a quiet introspection. I found myself walking through my house, not just seeing it as my home, but as the sum of a lifetime of work, of memories, of Arthur's presence that still lingered in every room. This house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was a legacy. It was a testament to a life lived with love and responsibility. And it deserved to be passed on to those who would cherish it, or at least respect the values it represented. When the day of the appointment arrived, I dressed carefully, choosing a smart navy dress Arthur had always liked. I wanted to present myself not as a victim, but as a woman in control of her affairs. Monica Holloway's office was in a modern building downtown, a contrast to my own old-fashioned sensibilities, but inside, her personal office was welcoming, with tasteful art on the walls and comfortable chairs. Monica herself was a woman perhaps in her late 40s, with intelligent eyes and a reassuring demeanor. She listened patiently as I outlined my current situation, my voice low but firm. I didn't dwell on the laughter, the specific incident, but I conveyed the profound sense of disrespect and the realization that my current beneficiaries, my grandchildren Liam and Chloe, no longer held the place in my life, or in my esteem, that they once had. I spoke of my desire to ensure my estate reflected my current wishes and values. "I understand," she said, her expression empathetic but professional. "These decisions are never easy, Mrs. Thompson, but they are yours to make. My role is to ensure your wishes are carried out legally and effectively." She asked to see my existing will, which I had brought with me. She read through it carefully, nodding occasionally. "It's a straightforward will, typical for its time," she commented. "Leaving the majority to your grandchildren after provisions for your son is quite common." We discussed my assets. The house, which was mortgage-free and had appreciated significantly in value over the decades, my savings, carefully accumulated for my years as a school secretary and Arthur's modest pension, a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my mother. It wasn't a vast fortune, but it was mine, earned through thrift and hard work. The thought of it falling into the hands of young people who had shown such callous disregard for my feelings, who saw me as a caricature rather than a person, now felt intolerable. Monica was meticulous, asking questions about my son Mark's financial situation, ensuring I understood the implications of disinheriting Liam and Chloe. "Are you certain this is the path you wish to take, Mrs. Thompson?" she asked gently. "Once this is done, it can create significant family rifts, Miss Holloway," I replied, my voice steady. "The rift, I fear, already exists. Their actions have made that clear. I am simply acknowledging it and acting accordingly. My primary concern now is my own peace of mind and the proper stewardship of what Arthur and I built." She nodded slowly, accepting my resolve. "Very well. Let's discuss what you would like the new provisions to be." This was the part one had given much thought to. It wasn't enough to simply remove Liam and Chloe. I wanted my assets to go somewhere meaningful. The process of drafting the new will with Monica Holloway took several sessions, spread over a few weeks. It wasn't something I wanted to rush. Each decision felt weighty, each clause a definitive statement. We first addressed my son, Mark. Despite my disappointment in his passivity during the incident with the grandchildren, he was still my son. I made sure he would receive a portion of my savings, enough to provide him with some security, but not the entirety of the estate as it might have been had circumstances been different. He had his own income and Karen too from their business, the one I had helped them start. They were comfortable. The bulk of the estate, however, particularly the house, was where the significant changes lay. "And what about the remainder, Mrs. Thompson?" Monica asked, her pen poised. "Specifically, the house and the larger share of your savings?" I had considered several options. A part of me, the part that still ached with a grandmother's wounded love, had fleetingly wondered if this was too harsh. But then the echo of their laughter would return, sharp and clear, and my resolve would solidify. I thought about charities, causes Arthur and I had supported quietly over the years, a local children's hospital, an animal shelter. These were worthy, certainly. But then I thought of my niece, Sarah, my late sister's daughter. Sarah was a single mother, a nurse, working tirelessly to raise her 2 young children. She lived in a small rented apartment, always struggling to make ends meet, yet she never failed to call me every week, just to chat, to ask how I was, her voice filled with genuine warmth and concern. She sent handmade cards for my birthday and at Christmas, her children's clumsy, adorable drawings enclosed. She remembered details about my life, asked about my garden, about Arthur. She treated me with a consistent, unforced respect and affection that seemed to have evaporated from my closer family circle. "My niece, Sarah Kenwood," I said to Monica, "and her children. I want the house to go to Sarah, and the remainder of my savings to be put into a trust for her children's education." Monica made a note. "A commendable choice, Mrs. Thompson. It's clear you've given this a great deal of thought during those weeks. I spent a lot of time alone with my memories. I'd pull out old photo albums, tracing the faces of Liam and Chloe as babies, as toddlers, as smiling children. The ache was still there, a dull throb of what was lost, of what could have been. I remembered rocking Liam to sleep, singing lullabies Arthur used to sing to Mark. I remembered teaching Chloe to bake her first batch of cookies in my kitchen, her face smudged with flour, her eyes wide with delight. How could those sweet children have grown into the dismissive, almost cruel young adults who had laughed at my expense? Was it my fault? Had I spoiled them? Or was it simply the influence of their parents, Karen's subtle snobbery, Mark's increasing detachment? Perhaps it was a mixture of everything. But assigning blame felt less important now than taking decisive action. This wasn't about punishing them as much as it was about affirming my own worth and directing my legacy towards someone who genuinely valued connection and kindness. The process of itemizing my assets with Monica, reviewing bank statements, insurance policies, deeds, it was a stark reminder of a life carefully built, of prudence and responsibility. This wasn't just money. It was years of sacrifice, of going without, of saving for a rainy day, for a future I had always imagined would include the happy, grateful faces of my grandchildren. The irony was bitter. I was ensuring their future, just not in the way they, or I, had once envisioned. When the final draft of the new will was ready, Monica read it aloud to me in her office. Every word was precise, every clause clear and unambiguous. Liam and Chloe were mentioned by name, but only to state clearly that they were intentionally not beneficiaries beyond a token sum, a symbolic gesture to prevent any contestation that they had been merely forgotten. Hearing it read aloud, so formally, was a somber moment, yet also empowering. This was my voice, my decision, my final word on the matter. Life settled into a new, quieter rhythm after the meetings with Monica. The new will was drafted, signed, witnessed, and a copy was securely stored with her, another in my safety deposit box. A strange sort of peace settled over me, not happiness exactly, but the calm that comes from having made a difficult but necessary decision. I continued my routines, tending my small garden, reading, my weekly calls with Sarah. But interactions with Mark's family were tinged with a new awareness on my part. I saw them less frequently by my own choice. The Sunday dinners had dwindled after Liam's birthday incident. I'd made polite excuses, pleading a slight cold or a previous engagement. The truth was, I couldn't bear to sit at that table again, the memory of their laughter still too raw. On the occasions I did see them, usually brief visits initiated by Mark, I found myself observing Liam and Chloe with a detached sort of curiosity. They seemed oblivious, carrying on with their usual casual air, sometimes still making those slightly impatient remarks if I paused too long or asked a question they deemed unnecessary. They clearly had no inkling of the profound shift that had occurred within me or the very concrete steps I had taken as a result of their behavior. Their underestimation of me was, in a way, almost insulting in its completeness. Did they truly think I was so far gone, so diminished, that their disrespect would have no repercussions? One afternoon, Mark called. His voice had that slightly forced cheerfulness he adopted when he was about to ask for something or when he felt vaguely guilty. "Mom," he began. "Karen and I were talking. We were wondering if you'd thought any more about maybe getting some help around the house? Someone to come in a few times a week? Or perhaps even looking at those lovely new retirement apartments over by the lake. They have wonderful facilities." I listened patiently. The implication was clear. I was getting to be a bit much for them. A concern, perhaps even a burden. The lovely new retirement apartments were, I knew, code for getting you out of this big house so we can start thinking about its future. "Mark," I said, my voice calm and even, "I appreciate your concern, truly. But I am perfectly capable of managing my own home. And I have no intention of moving. Arthur and I built this house, and I plan to stay here for as long as I am able." There was a slight pause. "Oh. Okay, Mom. Just a thought. We worry, that's all," but the worry didn't sound genuine. It sounded like thwarted convenience. Later that week, Chloe called, a rare occurrence. "Nana? Hi. Dad said you weren't feeling great. Are you okay?" Her voice was saccharine sweet, the kind she used when she wanted something. "I'm quite well, Chloe. Thank you for asking," I replied, my tone polite but cool. "Oh, good. So listen, about that art festival next month? I need a new easel, a really good one, and they're super expensive." The audacity of it, after everything, was almost breathtaking. I gently but firmly told her that my budget didn't allow for such an expense at the moment. Her disappointment was palpable, quickly followed by a curt goodbye. It was another small confirmation that my decision, however painful, had been the right one. They saw me as a resource, a tap to be turned on when needed. The respect, the genuine affection, was conditional at best, or perhaps entirely absent. The final act of signing the will with Monica had been almost ceremonial. 2 of her staff members, discreet and professional, had acted as witnesses. As I signed my name, Alara Thompson, on the crisp paper, I felt a tremor pass through me, not of weakness, but of profound finality. This was it. The die was cast. I had taken control of my narrative, of my legacy. I remembered Monica's words. "My role is to ensure your wishes are carried out," and they would be. I thought of Sarah, of her children. The house, Arthur's roses, the sunny kitchen. It would go to someone who would appreciate it, someone who understood the value of kindness and connection. A quiet strength filled me. I was not the forgetful, dithering old woman my grandchildren seemed to think I was. I was a woman who knew her own mind, who valued respect, and who was not afraid to act on her convictions. The storm was yet to break, but I was prepared. The moment of revelation didn't come in a dramatic, courtroom-style reading of the will after my demise. It arrived much sooner, and in a way, far more directly, which, in retrospect, provided a certain immediate, if somber, vindication. Several months had passed since I'd signed the new will. Life had continued its altered course. My interactions with Mark, Karen, Liam, and Chloe were infrequent and superficial. I focused on my own well-being, on my calls with Sarah, on tending my garden which seemed to bloom with particular vibrancy that year, as if sensing my renewed spirit. One Saturday afternoon, Mark and Karen stopped by unannounced. This was unusual. They typically called first. They had expressions on their faces that immediately put me on alert, a mixture of strained concern and something else, something I couldn't quite place, but that felt predatory. "Mom," Mark began, settling himself on the edge of Arthur's armchair, a place he rarely sat. Karen perched on the sofa, her handbag clutched tightly in her lap. "We need to talk about something serious." My heart gave a little flutter, but I kept my expression neutral. "Oh, What is it, Mark? Well, he hesitated, glancing at Karen, who gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It's about the future. Your future. And, well, the house, there was. I'd been wondering when this would come. Karen and I have been doing some thinking. This house is very big for one person, Mom. The upkeep, the property taxes, they're only going to go up. And, Liam will be finishing his degree next year, and Chloe is thinking about her own place soon. They'll need a good start in life. I listened, saying nothing, my gaze steady. Karen chimed in, her voice oozing synthetic sympathy. And Ilara, dear, we worry about you here all alone. What if you fell? It would be so much better if you were somewhere with more support. We've been looking at some lovely assisted living places. And, Mark continued, getting to the crux of it, we were thinking if you were to sell the house now, you'd get a good price. You could invest the money, live comfortably, and then, well, the remainder would naturally go to the kids, to Liam and Chloe. It would give them such a wonderful head start. It's what you'd want, isn't it? For your grandchildren? He smiled, a confident, expectant smile, as if the matter was settled, as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion. They had clearly rehearsed this. They saw the house, my house, as a piggy bank waiting to be cracked open for their children's benefit. The casual assumption, the entitlement after everything, was astonishing. This was my moment. I took a slow breath. Mark, Karen, I began, my voice quiet but firm. I appreciate your foresight. However, I've already made my own arrangements for the future. And those arrangements have been formalized, Mark frowned. Arrangements?
What do you mean, Mom?
I said, looking directly at him, then at Karen, that I recently updated my will. And in that new will, this house, and the bulk of my estate, will not be going to Liam and Chloe. The silence that fell was instant and absolute. Mark's smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Karen's carefully constructed composure cracked, her eyes widening.
What?
Mark finally stammered. What are you talking about? Not going to Liam and Chloe? But they're your grandchildren. Of course, it's going to them. No, Mark, I said, my voice unwavering. It is not. I have made other provisions. My niece, Sarah Kenwood, and her children will be the primary beneficiaries of my estate, including this house, Karen gasped, a hand flying to her chest. Sarah? Your sister's girl?
But why?
What on earth for? This is outrageous, Ilara. It is my decision, Karen, I replied calmly, based on my own judgment and my own wishes. Liam and Chloe have disappointed me.
Deeply.
Their behavior, their lack of respect, has consequences. Mark was staring at me, his face a mask of confusion and dawning anger. Disappointed you? What are you talking about? That little incident at Liam's birthday? That's what this is about. Because you repeated a story and they chuckled? Mom, that's ridiculous. You're taking this way too far. They're kids. They are young adults, Mark. I corrected him. Old enough to know the difference between affection and mockery. And it wasn't just one incident. It was the culmination of many. A reflection of how I am viewed, how I am treated. I will not have my life's work, Arthur's legacy, passed on to those who hold me in such low regard. The air in the room crackled with tension. The quiet living room, usually a place of peace, felt like a battleground. But I felt strangely calm, strangely empowered. I had spoken my truth. The ball was now in their court. The immediate aftermath of my quiet announcement was anything but quiet. Mark's face went from disbelief to a mottled red of anger. You can't be serious, Mom. This is vindictive. Sarah Kenwood? We barely see her. What right does she have? She has the right I have given her, Mark, I replied, my voice remaining level despite the storm brewing in him. She has consistently shown me kindness, respect, and genuine affection, qualities I seem to have found lacking closer to home. Karen, having recovered from her initial shock, launched into a tirade. This is absurd, Ilara. You're being manipulated. Or perhaps you're not thinking clearly. Maybe we were right. Maybe you do need to be in a place where people can look after your decisions. The insinuation was clear. I was senile, incapable. The very thing their laughter had implied. The irony was almost too much. My mind is perfectly clear, Karen, I stated, my gaze unflinching. Clearer than it has been in a long time. My solicitor, Monica Holloway, can attest to my soundness of mind when I sign the new will. It is ironclad, a solicitor? Mark exclaimed. You went to a solicitor behind our backs? My financial and legal affairs are my own, Mark. I don't require your permission to manage them, I said. This is about Liam and Chloe. Our children. Your grandchildren. How could you do this to them? They love you, Karen cried, her voice rising dramatically. Do they, Karen? I asked softly. Their actions have spoken far louder than any belated protestations of love you might offer on their behalf now. Laughter can be a cruel weapon, especially when wielded against someone who has only ever shown you love for the next hour. They tried everything.
Pleading.
Accusations. Guilt trips. They painted pictures of Liam and Chloe's devastation, their financial struggles without my generous inheritance. Mark even tried to appeal to Arthur's memory. Dad would never have wanted this, Mom. He loved those kids. Your father, I said, my voice tight with emotion, valued respect and integrity above all else. He would have been deeply disappointed by their behavior, as am I. And he would have supported my right to decide where our legacy goes. Eventually, they realized I wouldn't budge. My quiet resolve was a wall they couldn't breach. They left, not with the polite, hollow love yous of the past, but in a state of angry, bewildered silence. Mark paused at the door, his face grim. You'll regret this, Mom. No, Mark, I said sadly. I already regretted not doing it sooner. What I regret is the behavior that made it necessary. After they were gone, a profound wave of exhaustion washed over me, but beneath it, there was also a sense of profound relief. The secret was out. The confrontation, though unpleasant, was over. I had stood my ground. I had protected my dignity. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was Liam. His voice, usually so confident, so tinged with that youthful arrogance, was hesitant, almost childlike. Nana? Dad told me what you did. About the will? Yes, Liam, I said. He did. But why, Nana? I don't understand. We love you. There it was again, that word, love, thrown around so easily now that something valuable was at stake. Liam, I said, trying to keep the weariness from my voice, love is also about respect. It's about how you treat people, especially your family. Laughing at your grandmother because she's getting older and sometimes repeats herself is not an act of love. It's an act of cruelty. There was a long silence on the other end. Then a small, choked sound. I didn't mean it like that, Nana. We were just messing around. It wasn't messing around to me, Liam, I said. It was deeply hurtful. And it made me see things very clearly. Chloe called next, her tone a mixture of indignation and a poorly feigned sorrow. It was much the same conversation. Apologies that sounded hollow, justifications that fell flat. I listened, but my decision remained firm. The trust had been broken too profoundly. The apologies felt like a reaction to the consequence, not a genuine remorse for the action. The shift in family dynamics was immediate and stark. The already infrequent visits ceased altogether. There were no more calls, not even perfunctory ones. It was as if a curtain had fallen. There was a sadness in that, a mourning for the family I thought I had, but it was overlaid with the quiet strength of knowing I had done what was right for me. My peace of mind was worth more than their conditional affection. In the weeks and months that followed, a new kind of peace settled into my life. The absence of Mark, Karen, and the grandchildren, while initially a palpable void, gradually became a space filled with other things, quieter things. I spoke with Sarah more often. Her calls were a balm, her genuine interest in my well-being a stark contrast to the self-serving interactions I'd grown accustomed to. I told her, vaguely at first, that I had made some changes to my affairs that would benefit her and her children in the future. Her reaction was one of surprise and humble gratitude, not grasping entitlement. Oh, Elara, she'd said, her voice thick with emotion. You don't have to. I just enjoy talking to you. That, I knew, was the truth. I found myself spending more time in my garden. Arthur's roses seemed to thrive under my care, their blooms more vibrant than ever. I started volunteering at the local library a couple of mornings a week, reading to children. Their uncomplicated delight in stories, their wide, innocent eyes, reminded me of what true connection felt like. It was a gentle healing. My home, once the stage for family dramas and unspoken resentments, now felt truly mine again. It was a sanctuary of calm. I would sit in Arthur's armchair, not with a sense of loneliness, but with a feeling of quiet contentment. I had faced a painful truth about my family, and I had acted with courage and integrity. My dignity was intact. One afternoon, Monica Holloway called. "Ilara," she said, her voice warm, "I just wanted to check in, see how you were doing." I told her I was well, truly well. I told her about Sarah, about the library. "I'm glad to hear that," she said. "You made a difficult choice, but it sounds like it was the right one for you. You stood up for yourself, and that takes immense strength." Her words were a quiet affirmation. The vindication wasn't in the anger or distress of Mark, Karen, Liam, or Chloe. It wasn't about revenge. It was in this newfound peace, this restoration of my own self-worth. It was in knowing that my legacy, the sum of my life with Arthur, would go to someone who embodied the values we held dear: kindness, respect, genuine human connection. I occasionally heard snippets about Liam and Chloe through mutual acquaintances. Liam was apparently struggling to find a well-paying job after college, burdened by student loans he had perhaps assumed would be magically taken care of. Chloe's artistic ambitions were reportedly on hold due to lack of funds for supplies and studio space. There was a part of me, the grandmother part that never entirely dies, that felt a pang of sadness for their struggles. But it was quickly followed by the clear-eyed realization that these were the consequences of their own attitudes and actions, and perhaps the entitlement fostered by their parents. They were learning a hard lesson, one I had inadvertently taught them by refusing to be a punchline any longer. My legacy, I realized, wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about the statement I had made. It was about the quiet power of self-respect. It was about showing that even an old woman, perceived as forgetful and fading, has a voice, has agency, and deserves to be treated with dignity. If they learned anything from this, perhaps it would be to look beyond the surface, to value people for who they are, not for what they can provide. As for me, I found a new purpose in supporting Sarah and her children from afar, knowing that one day they would have the security I could provide. I found community in my small volunteer group. I found peace in my garden, under the watchful gaze of Arthur's roses. The laughter that had once wounded me so deeply had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of a life lived authentically, on my own terms. I had repeated myself, and they had laughed. So, I repeated my will, and in doing so, I rewrote my future, reclaiming my peace and my power. And that, I can tell you, was no laughing matter at all. It was the most profound act of self-love I had ever undertaken.